was born 48 years ago in Mqanduli. My mother is a single parent, and I spent the first 13 years of my life at a school called Pangindlela Junior Secondary School. Now, I was in the country of the Transkei, and in what is now grade 9, we used to write an external exam, which was just like matric. So you would finish your junior secondary schooling and then go to what was called a senior secondary school, which was the last 3 years of high school that took you into matric. I was taught everything in isiXhosa, including English, and people who've gone through this experience will know. There is a joke that goes around for decades, how you were taught English, which is, you speak English in isiXhosa. You say, when I was hwe, which means Xanda ndi-PPP. But that's how I learned English. And I really got to be able to read it properly because my grandfather used to buy the Daily Dispatch. And I used to get old copies from him and try and read it and then ask him what the words meant. And he got fed up. And he found an old dictionary somewhere which was missing some pages, and he taught me how to use it. And then he gave me more newspapers and the dictionary and told me not to bother him again. And I didn't, and that's how I learned to speak English. That helped me a lot because it meant that I could understand the questions at exam time. It also meant I could do my own reading at school, the school textbooks and so on, which makes a really critical difference, actually. Because when I look at my terrible relationship with accounting, I realized that what I struggled with initially was actually just understanding what the English is saying. So they ask you to construct an income statement, and they say Buyani pays Songezo or sells goods to Songezo on credit to be paid in 90 days' time. I would miss that part. That says in 90 days' time, and I would treat it as cash in hand. That's already been given. And so I would always wonder, but why am I wrong? And so all of these things in the development of a child, I believe, are really important and are politically important, and they've formed part of my political journey. There's another reason why that's important. And that is, and I will refer to a really important and well-regarded person who is a brother to someone I like and respect to my left here, Mr. Zibi, the former president. So there was this discussion around the 2000s about a president who is relatable or not, right? And that's how we ended up with the Zuma years. There is this divide in South Africa politically about who has legitimacy to be politically legitimate and politically relatable. So, and you could see this divide. Us professionals worshipped the ground the former president worked on. But there were also some people who said he's aloof. You remember that conversation? That he's aloof and unreachable. We must not take this for granted. It actually is an important consideration because, as we have seen, when you take it to extremes, it can lead to self-harm. The great listener that we wanted, or some people wanted in 2007, has brought us to this point of crisis today and is busy resurrecting himself to great fanfare. But these questions are important nonetheless, because I think in a country such as South Africa, you also have to try and answer the questions of how do you in leadership really transcend the divide between what is considered to be the common people and what is considered to be spaces like this, and how you bring those together. And so when I look at my own story, I often experience in rooms like this a really strange question, which is people who listen to me speaking English, which I learned from the Daily Dispatch, and then somebody will put up their hand at the end of the conversation and say, this is really, really good, but I'm worried that you cannot reach the rural people. How are you going to reach the rural people? How do you send this message? They're asking me, a villager, how I am going to talk to my parents in the village. But what they're saying really is that they worry that the message will not get through, because people like myself who've had the privilege of a tertiary education and the privilege of working for large international companies and traveling the world, that by doing so, you lose your identity and relationship with that which formed you. That's what people are really saying. And this assumption is made. But of course, for people like me and people from Shabuyalingan, we also know that at midday, you could be sitting in a boardroom, and at 5 o'clock, you could be slaughtering a sheep in the Eastern Cape. And so this divide is not complicated for us. We do it all the time. Going to church and doing umqimbi and slaughtering a goat and that sort of thing. We move between these two worlds. So what am I saying with this long introduction? I'm saying that it's time we grappled with a kind of politics that is hopefully going to bridge the divide. Both the divide in our heads and the real divide that we experience as South Africans. The last thing I want to say by way of introduction before I get to the few remarks I want to make is that I've also realized since I've been in politics that it's very different to being a commentator, like an editor, like I was, right? Because when you're an editor, it's really simple. You know, everything is in a straight line a lot of the time. The government should either do X or Y. But here's the thing. You can have all the great ideas you like. They must still find legitimacy with the voters. And the voters have got their own list of things that are important. And trust me, the list of things that are important to voters do not find congruence with what people in this room generally think. And so the conversation on the radio and TV is real. And the suggestions that are put forward are important. But at the same time, the experience of people, the daily experience of people means those very same ideas, which are really helpful, are also as abstract as anything that people have come across, because they don't relate to their daily experiences. So that is the other divide that we've got to bridge. And find the political language and the political expression, and just actually the language expression for it in policy, the policy expression and the political expression of that divide in a way that appeals to things that are common to all of us. And then hopefully we can get into some of the things I'm going to talk about. But it's important that we understand this divide. So on Thursday, it's Human Rights Day. And we are going to be told ad nauseum about history. And it's really, really important. About apartheid, about colonialism, which are really, really important. And both of them live with us today. So we are going to have a conversation generally that looks back. And it's important to always be conscious of the past so that we do not repeat the mistakes of the past. But here's the thing. Typically, we'll be told that only an exact repetition of that mistake amounts to an abuse as bad as the previous. So in other words, if it's not cops shooting people in the back while they're trying to flee after a peaceful protest, it's not as bad. Even though 100, 200 people may die from something else that is perpetrated by another government, which is a democratic government. So Human Rights Day happens in the context where what my people experience in Mkanduli, in Zwelitsha location, and Makomeni, and Nganasini, and Mangam, and Makumshini, which is having no water, has finally arrived in Hyde Park. And it's not nice. It's not like solar. You cannot go to someone and you mitigate the problem. And you have, what are they called? Inverters. There are no inverters for water. You either have water or you don't have it. So it's finally arrived. Here's a problem with water. It's second only to air. If you don't have it, you die. But that is a reality of a lot of people across the land. Untreated sewage and broken water piping and drainage that we see in a lot of places. I look at Stats SA's reports with interest where they talk about the level of water and sanitation. It's really interesting because, if you know the former Transkei where I come from, I think there are only 2 towns which have got a sewerage works. It's Mthatha and Butterworth. The rest actually don't. You need a septic tank if you are to have a flush toilet. You pay for that septic tank yourself. You pay for that truck that is going to fetch that water. So the majority of people use pit latrines. And people from my area also insult the DA for not having flush toilets in the Western Cape. So let me tell you something that happens. And some people who are from my province will relate to this. So they're going to a funeral on a Saturday. They will stop at the Ultra City and make sure that you pee and do whatever you need to do before you get into the village, because you do not want to go to the loo there until the funeral is over. It's true. And we know it. So that's how some people live. Some people have got the option of going to the Ultra City and they're not eating anything at the funeral or drinking anything, so you don't need to use the toilet. That's what people say. You can look for it on social media. If you search for it, you will see it. It's there. But that's how millions of people live. I also had an experience in Ngobo in the Eastern Cape. The first time I realized how bad hunger is. I knew it is an issue, but I realized it's really bad. There was a young man sitting in front in a community meeting, and I thought that he hadn't slept the day before, and he was not really interested in this meeting until he started speaking, and he explained that he had not eaten in more than 24 hours. And a lot of other people in the room had also not eaten for more than 24 hours. So, okay, so you've got hunger, and you also have lack of water, which are really as basic as you get. You also have the ravages of climate change on poor and underserved areas. So there are the floods that we see in KZN that wipe out entire informal communities and so on, or the flooding in the Western Cape and so on, and it becomes a news item and we move on. Let me tell you something else about climate change, which is not just a discussion between the coal barons and those who are making it in the renewable space. So this new divide. So my family are subsistence farmers. We have farmed in the same way for generations. The people in my village and surrounding villages are the same. The problem is we don't plant maize. We plant maize at the same time. The weather patterns have completely changed. The rain patterns have completely changed. It's more extreme at odd times and so on. And so the yield for next year is going to be 0 kilograms, which makes the hunger problem worse. Because my late uncle Manelis Zibi was the first person to go straight from high school to university in our family. And my grandfather sold 6 sheep and 300 kilograms of yellow maize to pay 1,050 rand for his registration fees at the University of Transkei. So what I'm trying to say is that there's actual erosion of livelihoods and wealth and that sort of thing. And here we talk about a just transition, which is great. It kind of talks to the same issues. But I'm still on this divide again that we're on, where we're going to have a huge argument about coal in areas where people have got respiratory illnesses. I worked in the mining industry as well. Let me mention a couple of other things that people talk about, which is 10-year-old children who have children, and doctors in rural areas who do not know how to reconstruct their bodies because of the damage that has been done, and that by the time they're age 21, they suffer from cervical cancer and die. So these are the stories that have shaped our political mission, because you realize that we can talk about industrialization and all of these things. Really, these are really important. I can speak all day on those things. But when you get to a community and people are talking about completely different things, you have to try and bring the two together. Because if you don't, all of us remain commentators forever with clever ideas that get nowhere. So, how do we get out of this crisis? I think the first thing is that we need new leaders who think differently and understand leadership to be about more than legislating. And you know, this legislating and government thing has permeated all the way down to the lowest level in society, to the child in a rural area. People ask, what are you going to do for me? I want to know what you are going to do for me. So you have to have the difficult conversation that says a democracy is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, and nothing happens if you are not involved. I am not a miracle worker. I cannot do everything for you. We have to do it together. So there is a process of democratic awakening that we try and do at Rise Mzansi, because people have been told to sit like this and wait. And so what happens? 28 million out of 41 million people are waiting for a miracle. They don't vote anymore because somebody like me or like somebody else must fall from the sky and create miracles, and then we will vote. There will be no democracy left. And so we're not just trying to win an election. We're also trying to revive the democratic culture and deepen the democratic culture and democratic participation, because we have a participatory democracy actually in South Africa. The one that our parliamentarians pay lip service to, and in trying to destroy the scorpions, go and ask people whether the scorpions have ever helped them when they were being mugged. Of course, people are going to say no. And so they destroy them. But that's important. We also need to think differently about how we conceive political ideas. And I'll just share just one just now. So what we've decided is that in order to bridge this divide, we must build a politics and a political program and a way of thinking politically around the concept of well-being. Well-being of the person, well-being of the family, well-being of the community. In there are 160 policy ideas that you can bring. Because when you talk to real people, they talk to you about the things that they worry about the most. Not having food, not having a yield next year because of the rains that were too much or didn't come at all. They talk to you about drugs that are engulfing rural communities and townships and informal areas all over the country. It is bad. Debza and I have meetings. Debza is in our team. We have meetings in many places across the country. You call a meeting at 10 o'clock, the hall is full. And you always look, you'll find 10, 15 guys who are completely out of it. A young man in Alex last week told me about his daily struggle of waking up, not wanting to get out of bed, because when he finally gets out of the house, he's going to stare into nothing. There's no soccer field, no basketball field where he lives. There's no art center, no community center, nothing. And he worries about how long his day is going to be, and that it's endless. It's day after day after day after day. So we've tried to build a political idea around well-being. Because you think about the things that worry people the most every day in their homes. And that is why you will see food in our manifesto being a very important issue. People are hungry. 27% of kids in the Eastern Cape suffer from stunting. Then they form part of the 48% that never finishes school. And then they form part of the 49% of the unemployed who can never ever find a job. And then we just conceive a YES program for kids with matric or with some tertiary education. So we talk about healthcare in a way that is hyper-local and communal. We talk about education. We talk about what you should have in community centers and what they need to do. how far people should live from a health facility, how we need to change our thinking from wanting to jail everybody with a narcotic in their pocket to sending to rehab those who are substance abuse addicts and arresting those who sell and distribute. Because these things are ingrained in our communities. We were in Mpumalanga, and the people there were saying we must just give them shambox to beat up the drug addicts. Every time I opened my mouth, there was a guy in front who was saying, just give us this. So we try and reshape our political thinking around this, because that takes you to spatial planning. It takes you to land justice. It takes you to spatial justice. It takes you to public transportation, which is owned by the public, and not taxis which abuse people day in, day out on the way to work. It takes you to how to stop the erosion of black people's income because they stay too far from where they work. It makes you think differently about well-being, in that throwing a basic income grant at a person of 1,000 rand who is still going to spend 700 rand of that money on transportation doesn't really solve the problem. But we need to get a few other things right. South Africa is not suffering from the lack of an absolutely brilliant idea for absolutely everything. We actually are not getting the basics right. That's at a fundamental level, we are not getting the basics right. We are not getting the basics right because we've got bad leaders with bad intentions. They appoint bad or unsuitable people to really critical positions, and these people cannot do the job. That's the bottom line. So if it takes our government a year to appoint a chief executive and FD at Eskom and at Transnet, what brilliant policy idea can you come up with to solve that problem? And yet, between Eskom and Transnet, there's 3% GDP growth that is being held up there. And then this government says that the private sector is on strike, it doesn't want to invest. Come on. Who's from Durban here? Okay. You two are from Durban. When last were you there? Forget the rubbish. I want to talk about shipping. Because you never used to see so many ships all the way up to Mhlanga and all the way up to Palito because the port isn't working. The port isn't working partly because the rail isn't working. The rail isn't working partly because there's no leadership at Transnet. Okay, there is now. But we're looking for a miracle idea. So we need to focus on the basics, whether it is Transnet, it is Eskom, it is getting water infrastructure, because without those three things, there is no well-being and there is no economy. There's nothing to speak of. And so that is why we focus a lot on infrastructure, regional infrastructure, municipal infrastructure, road infrastructure. But the number one thing that we've put in our manifesto is leadership, governance, and implementation. It's the first thing that we talk about. It's the first thing that we talk about. And before I sit down, because I haven't been timing myself, and I worry that I'm going to preach, my grandfather was a preacher. And I take after him in so many ways. But I just want to make a few closing remarks and then we have a conversation. I've decided not to regurgitate our manifesto. All of you can read. So you can Google it while we, while we talk, Buyani and I. But I want to mention a couple of other things. We also need political reforms in South Africa. They are really important. Because what we have done is we have persisted with a political formula that was put in place partly to accommodate the peace settlement that we had in 1994. That was necessary at the time. It gave us the party list proportional representation system, where very few people in this room know who represents their area in parliament. We don't even have electoral districts here. So people are completely accountable to their political parties. We gave the president extraordinary executive powers to appoint DGs and SARS commissioner, police commissioner, head of the army, and so on. And we saw how that goes when you've got a bad president. We don't have safeguards in place. I make this example all the time, and I hope they haven't fixed the problem. I hope they fixed the problem since. But I make this example, and I made it in this institution last year. So in the Reserve Bank Act, the person whose responsibility it is to set the repo rate is the governor, without consulting anyone. Did we know that? Okay, he knew. Is that a good thing?
It's not a good thing, because you're leaving the decision to someone who can be appointed politically.
Yeah.
So like, let's say Cyril Ramaphosa can appoint his brother, let's say.
Right.
And that man is now the Reserve Bank governor, who can then set the repo rate.
And that person drinks a lot and is on drugs. And after drinks with his or her friends, can change the repo rate tomorrow. That's really what the MPC is, global best practice. Nothing more. It's not in the law. You won't find it. Unless I'm mistaken. So we're persisting with this system. So the person who's Reserve Bank governor is appointed by discretion, by presidential discretion, and you trust and you hope. That is the right person. And that they will make all decisions for the right reasons. I was a journalist. If you want information from the government, you want to make what is called a PIA application, Promotion of Access to Information Act, they almost never give it. You have to go to court. But a constitutional court judgment in the Mail and Guardian versus the president matter about the Zimbabwe elections. The former Chief Justice Sandile Ngcobo wrote that judgment, and he said, in our law, all government information should, as a rule, be made public, except in instances where the government has a specific reason why it should not. And that reason should be a justifiable, constitutionally compliant reason. It works the other way. If you want the most basic information, you've got to go to court. So we need political reforms, because without changing the rules of how our politics work, you cannot hope that you will get an angelic set of leaders. At some point in the future, they will do nothing wrong in a bad system. And so our manifesto is comprehensive. It tries to bridge this divide that I was talking about. We talk about the basics. We talk about how you change some of the institutional rules in order to get us to a point. But you need to say this in a language that enables me to have a community meeting in Kgaleshiwe. Thank you.